Hi, we're Paul and Kimberlee, and this is Riffs and Rants.
This week's Riffs and Rants, or actually this week we'll be riffing and ranting about happiness hypothesis. So this is by Jonathan Haidt, the author of The Righteous Mind. It's a fantastic book. Kimberlee and I were talking about it over dinner. We read it this past week and the week before, and we think that we could probably talk
multiple times about this book.
At length.
Yes.
It's
very in-depth.
It's an amazing book. So the basic premise of the book is that he says ancient wisdom, basically religions, philosophies, hold a lot of truth, but then they miss the mark on some areas of happiness. So the idea being that Buddha, Jesus Christ, Lao Tzu, Seneca, all of these great minds from the past really hit the mark when it came to prescribing things that we as individuals need to do in order to attain happiness. But with the golden age, maybe that's a little bit too strong, but recently, psychology, and specifically positive psychology, has given us a lot of tools to be able to actually understand and measure happiness. So what Jonathan Haidt does is he is basically taking a positive psychologist's view on ancient philosophical and religious wisdom as it pertains to attaining happiness. And it's a fantastic book.
Yeah, I think that
I just wrote my notes. That was total faux pas.
One of the coolest things about this book is it's not only talking about finding happiness, but he breaks down and gives you tools and steps and basically says happiness is attainable for everybody, no matter your circumstances. It's just knowing some of these things or taking action to change your surroundings or certain behaviors or thought processes in order to attain happiness. And he even he goes so in depth. He talks about what is happiness and finding meaning and purpose and so much. But I just really liked I liked everything. But it's pretty cool to think about how we can attain our own happiness. Happiness is attainable by everybody.
Yeah, so one of the things that he talked about in the book that I thought was really interesting is that you have, I think he called it an affective style.
That sounds right.
So basically what he was saying is that we're born, and he actually called it the genetic lottery. So some of us are born and we're basically just optimists, right? I'm not really one of those people. I am fairly pessimistic by nature. I come from a long line of proud pessimists. So genetically, I'm kind of set up to fail, actually, when it comes to happiness.
Well, he talks about being a pessimist doesn't mean you're an automatic failure. It's just harder.
Yeah.
And there are long-term studies that look at optimists versus pessimists, and optimists tend to do better in really trying circumstances because of their outlook. Right.
Well, and that was something that was really interesting. And there's a book, I don't remember which one it is now off the top of my head, but they did talk about how optimists don't always have the win when it comes to, trying circumstances. Realism is really important.
Right.
If you believe that it's going to be sunny every single day and it's not because you're in a concentration camp, that can be really difficult because eventually one day you'll realize it's not going to be sunny tomorrow. I'm still going to be in a concentration camp. Right. It's the people that basically understand that I can control, my 3-foot area, right? That's what I'm going to focus on. And I can get small wins there. I can find meaning there. Those are the people that are going to be most successful in the long term. But the thing that he talked about was that, so you're going to be born, all of us are born with a particular affective style. We're going to be leaning positive or leaning negative. We're going to find challenges harder. We're going to have a lot more negative talk, and some of us will not have that, right? They'll have positive internal dialogues for the most part. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting is that he talks about how Buddha actually got it right. That meditation was one of the ways that we can change our affective style, right?
Well, yeah, there's a whole chapter dedicated to changing your mind. Not in the phrase of, oh, I changed my mind, but literally changing your mindset is a better way of putting it, probably. Right. And he does have 3 things in meditation. It's the very first thing on there.
I thought it was really interesting because it's meditation, cognitive therapy, I think was the other one, and then Prozac.
Yeah.
So it's, meditation, which you can do by yourself, and that's hard. It's really challenging, but it's actually kind of insightful because that was one of the most important things that I did in my early 20s to basically get out of the death spiral that I was in. I mean, actual death spiral, right? Yeah. Like, some people know my story, and if I hadn't gotten into Buddhism and meditation, I probably would have died in my early 20s,
right?
From either drugs or drinking or whatever it is, right? But the meditation is one way to change the way that your mind works. The other one being cognitive therapy, and probably the easiest way to think about cognitive therapy, people see people running around with rubber bands on their wrists,
right?
And you'll see them, they'll snap the rubber band, and what they're doing is they're training themselves to not think negative things, right?
Your mind.
So your mind thinks something negative, you snap the rubber band, and you go, oh, okay, no subconscious, that's not good.
It's training your automatic thoughts, and responses.
Exactly, to become more of that positive affective style. Yeah. And then the other thing that he said was Prozac, right? So you can change the way that your brain works through medication.
Well, and the thing he says that I think is important to keep in mind is that meditation and cognitive therapy don't work for everybody. There are some people where they will do that and their brain chemistry is such that is not enough. Right. And therefore, medication should be readily available for anyone who is seeking to change their mindset and needs that extra.
Well, I think I remember reading in the book that he actually says that medication should be readily available to basically anybody.
Well, he says to everybody.
That wants to change their mindset. And the way that he framed it, which I thought was actually really... I don't want to say insightful or controversial, but it was different, right? Like, I haven't thought of it that way.
It is different.
Was that you would never say to someone who had to wear glasses, like, oh, well, you have to wear glasses. Like, that's wrong. Right? He's basically saying, like, some of us were born, most of us actually, are born with a negative affective style.
Right.
And that puts you at a disadvantage for long-term happiness. Right? Was it Freud? I think Freud is the one that says that that reality is too hard for us, so we find ways to basically self-medicate through diversions, drinking, things of that nature. Right. And that's obviously that's the way that a lot of us live our lives. But what Jonathan Haidt's saying is that
something better.
Right. Jonathan Haidt is basically saying that no, meditation, cognitive therapy, Prozac will allow you to basically sidestep some of those self-medicating avenues that are destructive.
Right.
So yeah, I thought that was amazing. I thought the other chapter that just blew my mind was the one on love and attachments.
Yeah, I was thinking that one too.
Love and attachments. So this book had, it's a pretty decent sized book. Right? I don't know how many hours it took me to read it, but significant, probably 7 or 8.
It's not overly long, but it's so in depth. It's a difficult speed read.
Yeah, you definitely can't rip through this one quick because there's not a lot of fluff.
Too much, yeah.
Yeah, he's not really waxing eloquent ever. He's very rarely actually using some kind of case study or something that doesn't directly
Right.
drive to the point.
Right.
Right. You know, right now I'm working on The Artist's Way, and half of those chapters, I mean, it's a wonderful book, but the early part is where the meat is, and then the last half of each chapter is basically like the author basically talking about how this helped this artist and that artist. Yeah, and it's a good thing, but you know, like it's easy to basically be like, okay, chapter's done, chapter's done, chapter's done. This one is just completely jammed.
Cover to cover.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that like each chapter basically has like mini chapters inside of it. And if you don't read every single piece, it's really difficult to understand what he's talking about.
If you miss something, you've got to go back and find it because he references it a lot.
Right. He uses a lot of metaphors. He sets up a lot of concepts that then he goes back and references, which I thought was, you know, pretty cool.
Well, the thing that I really like about this book is it's very much a textbook in the sense that there's just so much information and it's a learning book. But the way it's written doesn't read like a textbook at all. It's really engaging. It's really interesting. He has a good writing voice. So even though there's not a whole lot of fluff, it's not a chore to read. Because I do not read textbook style very well. You know, like I don't. So
no, and I thought the other thing that was really cool is, you know, he keeps his own personal voice or his own personal opinion out of most of the book.
And uses a lot of outside quotes and research.
But he does lean in every once in a while and basically says like, hey, you know, I'm a worrier. I have I have issues with these.
Right.
And he writes it in a way that's hopeful. Because I think that's one of the things that is hard for me because I struggle with emotional intelligence. And a lot of the things that come easy to people that are just likable in general. Every time I look at a book like that, I'm like, like this is another book that's going to make me feel really terrible about myself. Right. But, you know, this book and pretty much all the books that we've read recently have done a really good job of basically framing it for people like me.
For everybody.
Right. That hey, like, you're not a lost cause. And the reality is that no one is a lost cause.
No.
Right? That you can actually overcome pretty much anything. He even talks, there's a whole chapter about traumatic growth. Right? Which I thought was a really good chapter. But to get back to the chapter on love and attachments, which I thought was just mind-blowing. The part that, I'll just read the quote. So he's talking about, he's basically he brings in a lot of evolutionary psychology, positive psychology into the writing, into the science, right? And one of the things that he talks about is, why is it that humans, why do we have long-term mates, right?
Right.
Most other animals...
When it goes against, as some people say, it goes against nature to be monogamous.
Right.
And he addresses that.
Right. And he said most mammals basically will mate and then...
It's for reproductive purposes.
Right, but then the bond, there is bonding aspects, right?
Right.
But the bonding happens between child and mother.
Right, not partners.
Not between partners, right? You might have partners that, you know, I think there are animals out there that do form like long-term partnerships, but they're rare. Right. You know, especially in like higher order mammals, that's not like the common thing. But one of the things that he said was, it's interesting. These are all hypotheticals, or not hypotheticals, but they're all theories, right? Like none of them are proven or anything like that. But he was basically saying that because of the way that our infants are born, right? They're basically useless, right? Like they're completely dependent on you for the first couple of years of their lives.
That has infants that are so helpless for so long.
Right.
That's true.
Right. So, but what's interesting about that is that he basically says, if you look at hunter-gatherer societies, that the mothers cannot gather enough food on their own without help. They cannot. Once they have a child. Once they have a child, they can't support themselves. They have to have help. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to have the father. But that's
Right.
definitely a really good way to get an ally,
Right.
right? Is to basically bind yourself to your offspring through a shared gene pool, right?
To your partner through your
Right.
offspring. That's what you're trying to say.
Right,
Yeah.
right, exactly. But one of the things that he was saying is that I thought was really interesting is that why would a male stick around? His genes are already out there, right? So, like,
Right.
yeah, he doesn't want them to starve, but why would he cooperate with
Right.
a female
Mhm.
for so long,
Mhm.
right? I mean, that's
It's
really
such a
challenging.
chore.
Well, I mean, like,
I tease
we're not
him.
talking about like a mating season, right? We're talking about years and years and years,
Yes, I know.
right? Yeah, I know you know. But he was saying that evolutionarily, there's a theory that the bonding mechanism between mother and child is the same bonding mechanism that is used for romantic love. Yeah, I'll just read the quote now. So sexual activity, especially if it includes cuddling, extended touching, and orgasm, turns on many of the same circuits that are used to bond infants and parents. It's no wonder that childhood attachment styles persist into adulthood. The whole attachment system persists. So I thought that was like fascinating. I never thought about that. That the way that you bond between mother and child is going to inform the way that you bond with potential spouses, right? Spouses, life partners, whatever you want to call it, right? So if you have
attachments in general, even friendships.
Mm-hmm. But most specifically, he's talking
specifically talking about that. But I'm just saying it is broadened to all your relationships.
Right. But yeah, and that that it's so important that we have physical touch. He talks a lot about that one study, that famous study about the monkeys. Yeah.
Monkey study. Yeah.
Yeah, which I thought was amazing.
Yeah.
Right.
It is fascinating.
But I just thought it was really interesting that physical touch and physical intimacy, is so crucial to human attachment. Like adult romantic human attachment is not just sex because it feels good. It's because it actually forms actual bonds, right? Like deep, long-lasting bonds of love, right? Those are the same bonds that form between mother and child, and that type of bond is what informs the child that this is a good attachment, and it informs their psychology.
Right.
And I thought that was really interesting. He has another quote that I thought was really insightful in the same chapter, which is, good relationships make people happy. And then later he says, you never adapt to interpersonal conflict.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, and yeah, I had that written down too. But it's true. One of the things he talks about is relationships. I mean, he spends a lot of time about relationships and how they are key to our happiness. He talks about a lot of other things too, like the journey actually brings us more joy than the result, like working for something is more satisfying than actually succeeding. And we could talk about that. But there's that, and then there's relationships, and like having good relationships. He clarifies it. It's not just any relationship. It has to be good relationships, because no one gets comfortable with interpersonal conflict. And if there's a relationship you have that's constantly causing you strife, then you are not happy.
Right.
But if you have good relationships, then you're much happier than when you're alone. People are generally not happy alone.
Right. Well, we are, social beings.
Right.
Like at our core, I think it was interesting. I don't know if it was in this book or if it's in the book Social that I'm reading right now as well. But it basically says that we are both, how do they put it? So we're part hive-like, and then we're also part individualistic, right? So like part of our evolutionary psychology is I'm going to get mine, right? Like we naturally are, I don't want to say predatory, but we go and we claim things, right? We think for ourselves.
Right.
But another aspect of our evolutionary psychology, which makes us highly successful, is that we work well in large groups.
Right.
We're the most successful animal on the planet when it comes to working in large groups over vast, geographies, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So there are other animals on the planet, primarily insects, that can work in huge numbers, but they're localized to like really small areas.
I think the other thing kind of goes along with that he talks about that leads to happiness is he talks about connecting with others. Mm-hmm. Activities versus things.
Right.
So a lot of times activities that are more expensive are also activities that we do with larger amounts of people,
Right. Activities, not things that are more expensive.
Activities. Right. Activities that are more expensive. And then spending money on an activity like a trip, a big trip, or even like season tickets to a game where you're connecting with people rooting for the same team. Spending money on those things is much more satisfying than spending the same amount of money on a thing, like a computer or a TV screen.
Right.
Now, there might be some exceptions if you're spending money on a thing that then brings people together.
Right.
But overall, happiness is really based off of our relationships with people, with each other, connecting with other people.
Right.
Having good attachments, changing our mindset to be more positive.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much in this book. I mean, every single chapter you could basically break down and just talk for length about what he was, what he kind of put on the page. There was another one early in the book. I don't know if it's chapter 2 or so, but he talked about how we view ourselves and how we view others. And this was like a common theme throughout the book, right? So in chapter 1, he's talking about how we're divided, our divided selves. Mm-hmm. And there's multiple ways that we are divided internally. Mm-hmm. But the one metaphor that he used consistently throughout the book was the idea of the elephant and the rider.
Right.
So we are both the elephant and the rider, and the elephant represents basically our subconscious,
it's our
instinctual
automatic response and reactions versus the rider, which is our conscious thought, what we use our
rational
conscious thought to steer our automatic responses, our elephant.
And the reason he used elephant and the rider is that it's not just a horse, it's not a dog, right? It's an elephant. Mm-hmm. So your automatic responses are extremely powerful.
Right.
They are a good portion of what makes up your day-to-day.
They can take over and do their own thing.
They do take over and do their own thing. And that was one of the things that I thought was really insightful. And he actually talks about that. He had a quote that he said, once you understand that, then you understand that it is not a matter of brute force and will.
Right.
For changing you.
Right.
Right? And that's when he was talking about meditation, prozac, and cognitive therapy.
Right.
You need to train the elephant.
Right.
You can't force the elephant to do anything. It's an elephant, right? But you can train the rider to train the elephant to nudge the elephant into the right path, right? And over time, if you do that consistently, then the elephant starts to learn that's your affective style, right? Positive or negative. Right. Does the elephant get scared every single time something bad happens, or does the elephant basically say, "Nah, it's okay. We'll keep moving." But the one thing that I thought was really interesting about that is that we view ourselves. He talks about how we view ourselves as both. We normally don't view ourselves as both the elephant and the rider.
Right.
We usually
just view ourselves as the rider.
Right.
And the elephant is circumstance, or we make up reasons for the elephant.
Right. But then going along that, he talks a lot about different biases. So one of them was naive realism. And all of these different biases are areas or thought patterns that prevent us from understanding the world, right? So naive realism was defined as basically like each of us thinks we see the world directly as it is.
Right.
That's not true, right? None of us actually see truth.
Right. There's there's a good quote by Dr. Phil that says there is no reality, it's only perception.
Mm-hmm.
And so everyone thinks what they see, what they perceive is the way it is. But there's a lot of bias to our individual perceptions. It doesn't mean that that's exactly how it is.
Well, and the reality is that is not exactly how it is.
Right.
Like, period. That doesn't exist. And what I thought was really interesting about that is that he actually, Jonathan Haidt actually said, if he had to nominate one thing in his study of what prevents people from long-term happiness and global societal well-being, he said the biggest obstacle to world peace and social harmony probably is naive realism.
Right.
Coupled with some of the other ones, one of them being the myth of pure evil.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea being that, the myth of pure evil, you're doing stuff because you're evil, right? You are malicious in your intent. I see the world as it truly is, mix that with a little bit of idealism, and you have a nice little recipe for just terrible things.
Right.
So I thought that was like a really insightful part of the book, and I think the thing that was almost a little bit discouraging about that is that he said there are very few ways
to overcome that.
Right? Like, even when people are aware of the fact that they operate from a perspective of naive realism, everyone goes, oh, everyone else operates from a perspective of naive realism.
Right.
I really do see the world as it is. Right? So he said the one way that you can overcome that is that you have to basically look for fault in yourself.
Right.
And this goes back to the quote from Jesus, rather than take the splinter out of...
Don't cast the mote out of your neighbor's eye before you remove the beam
from your own.
And that's not a direct quote, obviously.
Right, but like, that's the basic idea, right?
Yeah.
Basically, saying that you have to look at your own faults before you start looking at other people's faults.
Yep.
And he actually had a technique. Jonathan Haidt had a technique in here that I think we're going to do a training on later on. Like, I think we'll do a little course on it later, because he breaks it down a little bit better. But the basic idea is that when you're in an interpersonal conflict with someone you care about, and you want to actually get past, some of these blockers, some of this pride that's preventing you from being able to have a meaningful conversation, right? Not just pointing fingers and throwing stones. He said the first thing that you need to do is find one way in which your behavior was not exemplary, right? So the first thing you need to do is just turn it on yourself and say, how did I handle this interaction poorly? Right? And that act is one technique in breaking down your naive realism bias. Right? Which I thought that was just brilliant. Just, again, so many things in this book that you can use, pull out, and apply to your life. And I think Kimberlee and I will probably be pulling more and more of this out, incorporating it into some of the courses that we're going to be releasing very soon. So make sure you go to our website and sign up for our Founders Club. The first 100 that sign up, we're just going to give all the courses as a founding member for free.
Full access.
But there's just so much in here. If you want to take the time to read this book, apply it in your life, I think this is just a fantastic book. It applies well to people that are religious, that have faith, agnostics, atheists. This is
it's
universally applicable.
Yeah, it is universally applicable, and a great, just if you feel like you need a boost, like there's a lot of ways that you can do that. So definitely worth checking out.
Definitely a good reference manual as well. Each of the chapters, I think I was looking at, 11 chapters, and all of them basically have a theme. So, how do you change yourself? How do you interact with others? How do you find love? How do you overcome adversity? So these are all themes that, religions and philosophies basically say, like, okay, this is this is a thing that we have to deal with.
Right.
And Jonathan Haidt basically distills all of those.
And I really like, at the beginning of each chapter, he'll often quote, you know, religious leaders, secular leaders. And just reading those quotes even gives you an idea, because he references them throughout the chapter. So, oh, we're going to talk about this. So it's a really easy way to kind of get a feel for the chapter if you just go to the front and read the two quotes.
Yeah, I think if I was going to make one criticism of the book, and it's probably just because reading The Artist's Way, and I'm looking at it because it's on my desk right now. The Artist's Way actually breaks down at the end of each chapter. It has like a step-by-step. Like, these are things that you can do from this chapter to apply it in your life. And it's written in that style, like every single week, you know, you do something.
Right.
That's the one criticism that I have of this book, is that you really have to kind of extract the gold.
Yeah.
And then apply it in your life.
It's not a step-by-step process.
No.
But he does do a good job. It's not that hard to extract.
No, because he outlines it pretty clearly and, you know, spells it out.
He explains it, gives you a background.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, Happiness Hypothesis, fantastic book by Jonathan Haidt, and I would highly recommend reading it.
Yep.
So be sure to like and subscribe if you found this useful. Again, we are Paul and Kimberlee, and head over to paulandkimberlee.com to sign up for our Founders Club and get some free goodies for doing so, and we really appreciate it.
We hope you enjoyed watching our Riffs and Rants, where Paul got to talk for 30 minutes about the happiness hypothesis. If you'd like to hear me talk a little bit more, make sure you check out our 3 for 3, where I get a little bit more say. And also like and subscribe, and we will see you again.
Number 2 is love and attachments. So specifically, our attachment style that we develop in our early developmental years, our young childhood years, persist throughout our lives.